Mm-hmm.
And we got some water.
Yeah, and the other copies can just go here, I suppose.
Right.
Just so I have.
I'll keep some up front too, so you
Mm-hmm.
can just hand them to some people. But there's
Thank you.
a
It's
crisp one to look at, and
great.
the
Fantastic.
one that's been
Thank you
through
so
your
much.
pocket for a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been been everywhere, really. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah. So.
Was your recorded in Tulsa? Was your talk in Tulsa recorded?
No,
No.
no, no. I think there must have something to do with the university and its copyright and something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
Which is a shame because there were some fantastic presentations in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Not just on Bob Dylan, but on Woody Guthrie. On
Oh, I'm sure.
it,
Well, yeah, and nobody could attend them all, so
no,
it's just the people that saw the ones they saw.
yes,
you know.
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of
I mean, sometimes with the spring conferences, the sport ones, we do it so that there's like one mega panel that everybody goes to everything. You know, so then you don't have to juggle between 6 or 7 panels. You know, so but it's well attended. I mean, Tulsa was amazing. You know, it really was. You know, so we'll see. So if you tell me what you want me to do.
I'm going to go with that, and why don't you scoot your chair up just a little bit? This can't extend any further.
Wait a minute, let me just.
And I think the quality of the sound will be a little better if you're, just
Yeah.
5 inches closer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're still not trying to get right on top of it.
Yeah,
You're just
you
kind
get
of
up and
closer to it.
move it back.
This.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
I've got you.
so here, I'll swing it out of your way while you sit back down. But let's put you here. And
Yeah.
swing it away. Have a seat.
Okay.
And then why don't you start as soon as I say go? Why don't you start by saying that you have the forthcoming book and it's due out,
Yes.
and then go on from there because that'll give.
I'm going to read a bit to you, and if you tell me you want me to start again.
Yeah, right.
We
If
start.
I say, well, although you'll know this, if some people
Yeah.
come in, then just circle back, and your publisher can always edit, the
Yeah.
finished product. So let me get this, and okay, so I'm going to make you visible to the world first, and then I'm going to make you audible. Oh, you are already audible. Okay, great. So we'll trim that later. Okay, so now you're visible, you're audible. Go ahead and get started.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be at Bird and Beckett's here in San Francisco, and Bob Dylan has recently been calling his lifelong pilgrimage a rough and rowdy ways or never-ending tour, and I guess I feel a bit like that myself in terms of the miles I've covered in the UK, in Tulsa, the Bob Dylan Institute and Research Centre, to promote my book, Road Maps for a Soul, An American Journey with Bob Dylan. And I want to take you back a little bit to how I got interested in Bob Dylan. And I grew up in my ancestral roots are Irish and from the north of England. I don't know if anybody's heard of a town called Oldham near Manchester. Now, in the year 1800, Oldham was actually more important than Manchester because of textiles, cotton. It made its name, and that's where I grew up. And when I started listening to music, well, it was my first heroes were people like Del Shannon and Gene Pitney, who I still think is an amazing artist and underrated in many ways. So it's then that I got into Bob Dylan a little bit, and I'm going to speak to you about some of the main themes of my book. But it's been a long time in its articulation, and I wanted to just to read a little bit from the first chapter, and it was a very poor. I don't know if anybody knows the book Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, and my childhood was like a more impoverished version of that in some ways, if that is possible. Single parent family, my father left for another woman, all of that in those catalogues of things that happen to people. So in the very first years I had this tinny record player, really cheap, and I listened to Gene Pitney endlessly at full volume in my tiny bedroom. And I read a little bit from the first chapter of the introduction, Walking the Road with Bob Dylan, and I say about how I got introduced to Dylan. And I'll use this as a way of introducing the wider themes of the study. Here we go. There was no space for Bob Dylan in this, my first record collection. I never heard him on Radio Luxembourg late at night, as I struggled to get a reception, or on the BBC light service during the daytime on the wireless in the kitchen, and knew nothing about him apart from a vague understanding that he was American. My first awareness of the name Bob Dylan, which I originally said Dylan, I couldn't even pronounce it, was at the small record shop called the Music Box, across the road from the bus garage, next to the post office, and close to Mumps Bridge in Oldham. That's the town I grew up in. I seldom bought records there, as they were too pricey for my small amount of pocket money to afford. However, each Friday, behind the ornate glass panelling and elegant wooden door of the entrance to the shop, the top-selling singles and albums charts were posted side by side. It became my practice, like a holy day of obligation, to take a detour on my way back home from school every Friday afternoon, to cast my hungry eyes upwards to gaze at the stars glittering in front of the wooden door, to see the name Dylan appear in both charts for the first time. In my untutored head, I still said Dylan when I noticed the title, The Times They Are A-Changing, at or near the top of both the album and single Melody Meter charts, not realising that this referred to both a specific song and the title of a whole collection of songs. Although I didn't know it at the time, this was the start of Roadmaps for the Soul, an American journey with Bob Dylan. The name stayed dormant at the back of my mind through my early teenage years, as I became interested in politics and literature and so on. And I go on to say, when I finally did encounter Bob Dylan, it was through his greatest hits album a couple of years after it was released. And since those teenage years, I was struck by awe and wonder as how the same singer and songwriter, this skinny wave-like figure with his constantly changing appearance, could have written and performed Blowing in the Wind and Like a Rolling Stone. I soon got used to his many voices, and I could relate to him. It was there, aged about 15, that my love affair with Bob Dylan really began. I'm pleased to say it has never left me. So that's from the first chapter, and it tells you a little bit about the genesis of this lifelong affair. And of course, you have to realise, I was reading about this quite recently, Bruce Springsteen became famous when he was 28 years old. Leonard Cohen had his first hit record at the age of 36. Bob Dylan was a star at 19 or 20, 65 years. He's never done anything else. So it's an amazing record of endurance and achievement to be still out there. I think last year, aged 83, he did 135 concerts. Now, I know he doesn't say, I've got to get on the email and book my flights and so on, but he still has to get himself there, performing to audiences, all the rehearsals, all the practice. He has an inner sense of steel, that guy. And so anyway, that's how I got into Bob Dylan. And let me tell you, if I may, something about the book itself. And Eric has kindly got some flyers, some handouts here, and I'm sure if you happen to drop in the next few days, he will circulate them, and so I get a wider audience for it, yeah? I've just come from Tulsa, where I presented a similar presentation at the World of Bob Dylan conference there, and it's amazing what's going on there now. It was my third visit. I've seen it grow from being like the Bob Dylan Centre, which is a commercial enterprise, to the beginnings of a research institute. And thanks to the wealth and, as most of you might know, Tulsa is an oil town. The George Kaiser Foundation, Family Foundation, acquired the archive for the city of Tulsa. And Dylan was asked why he picked Tulsa to host his archive. If you get a chance to go, there's over 100,000 artifacts there, and it's a truly amazing musical and popular culture record. And he said there were two main reasons. One was that he was from the Midwest himself. We've got on our side, the country I come from is called the Midwest, and because his first idol, Woody Guthrie, has a centre there as well. So the Bob Dylan Centre and the Woody Guthrie Centre have been really instrumental in the cultural regeneration of Tulsa itself. So anyway, if we move on a little bit, I have several themes that run through the book. Yeah, there's a couple of what I call prequels. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, I was invited by a writer called Anne-Marie May at the University of Odense in southern Denmark to present at a conference on Bob Dylan, and this then spawned a book, New Approaches to Bob Dylan, and she invited me to write a chapter for it, and I wrote a chapter called Senor, Senor, Bob Dylan and the Myths and Legends of Spanish America and the Old West. Because one thing with Dylan, he's always interested in the outsider, borders. As he said in one of his famous songs, to live outside the law, you must be honest. Yeah? So he turns the thing around a little bit. I then went to Tulsa and built on that to present a paper entitled Bob Dylan as Poet of the Renaissance, and that was in 2023. So bit by bit, the notion was building that I had enough material for a single author book on the subject. It's been a monster to write, 380 pages. It's now with Cambridge, the publisher. It's at the stage now where it's been edited by them. I'm doing the final proofread. The official launch will be at the Birkbeck College, University of London, on October the 13th, where I'm a research fellow. But the book should be out in September. And let me tell you a little bit about the key themes of it. It includes 6 places really. It starts in Hibbing, which is, I guess, where it all began. I don't know if anybody's been to Hibbing. Well, when I went there, it was an amazing place. It rather like, and this is one of the other themes that runs through the book, the comparison with Shakespeare. They were both William Shakespeare and Bob Dylan were complete unknowns. Shakespeare grew up in a market town, Stratford, middle class, went to London to seek his fame as an actor, director, playwright in the tabards, playhouses of London in the Renaissance. With Dylan, Hibbing, when I was there, it was like it was still in black and white. It was still in the 1950s. And the interesting thing with him, he had a very uneasy relationship with the Hibbing City Council. In his very good documentary called No Direction Home, produced excellently by Martin Scorsese, he said straight up, the first thing I knew about Hibbing was that I had to leave. There was nothing here for me. So Hibbing, basically, he didn't fit in. He was a geeky sort of kid, not a great sports player. He was just different, and he was bullied, and he didn't enjoy his time there. So he made it to New York, and Hibbing basically ignored him until he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Then they all started to take an interest. And when I was there 2 years ago on the first step of Road Maps for the Soul, you walk down Bob Dylan Drive, his house, which is owned by a guy called Bill Pagel, who bought his house in Duluth, where he was born as well, and he wants to turn it into a museum to Bob Dylan. And I was lucky enough to be given an individual tour. It was a hot day, and I was toiling in the sun, and I was just sat on the lawn, and he came out to speak to me. And I also bumped into a writer and musician called Jeff Slate, who is a big Bob Dylan fan, and I got a tour of the house and everything. And Bill Pagel manages a thing called Bob Links, which is a painstaking, if those of you who know the English Parliament, it's like a Hansard. It's like an archive of every performance, every review of Bob Dylan since the 1960s, called Bob Links. It's an amazing document. So Hibbing is where it all began. Then it moves to Tulsa. And of course, the reason for it being in Tulsa is the setting up of the Bob Dylan Research Institute, which has mushroomed. I mean, when it first started, it was mainly to establish the centre itself. Now, I was speaking only last week to Sean Latham, the director, and they have educational programs, outreach programs, because one of the odd things I noticed at the conference was that there's a contradiction, really, because the audience, the participants, were all white. Yeah. However, quite in contradistinction to many of the songs that Bob Dylan wrote, particularly his early songs. So what the centre is doing is trying to have educational programs to broaden awareness of Bob Dylan's music to a wider community. And it's going to be a tough task, but they make a start on that, yeah? So if we look at it, so we start with Cambridge as my publisher, and we move from Hibbing to Tulsa to Nashville, and I chose Nashville. One thing with Bob Dylan is that he's entirely his own person in terms of artistic integrity. At the time, he was at the peak of his fame, and I guess country music, a great collaborator with Johnny Cash, who was an exception, really, in country music. But there he goes, crooning Lay Lady Lay. And there was a very famous press conference with him when he did the Isle of Wight concert in 1970. And country music, laid-back style, and he at the interview, they said to him, Bob, have you become respectable? Are you a square? And he just smiled at them, you know. And so he's never been afraid to take on a new challenge. So we have Nashville because of his seminal change in music and embracing country music, and then we have New Orleans, and of course rooted in blues, jazz, cultural relevance to many of his songs, you know. And then I have an interlude in Barcelona where I reflect a little bit. And toward last year, in 2024, I was invited to give a paper at the Comparative Drama Conference in Orlando. So I've kind of added Orlando to it, mainly because of my interest in a song called Key West, which is, I think, the best song on the album Rough and Rowdy Ways. It's a latter-day masterpiece. So anyway, so those are the places in the book: Hibbing, Tulsa, Nashville, New Orleans, Barcelona, and Orlando. But the book itself is part travelogue, part memoir, part academic study. So the essence of it is the journey. So what I did, I love archive research. So I in 2023, 2024, I went to Hibbing, went to Tulsa, went to Nashville, then New Orleans, and last year to Orlando to develop the book itself. Yeah. But Dylan's songs are at the heart of the study. That's the main thing. As D.H. Lawrence famously said, never trust the teller, trust the tale. And I think Dylan's work bears testimony to that. So in addition to this, there's a parallel study of the influence of Shakespeare and other literary, cultural, historical, and political figures on Dylan's work, interwoven with each chapter. So I try to focus mainly on the songs, but I bring in, because one of the contrasts with Dylan is that he's rooted in the tradition. There's that wonderful essay by T.S. Eliot called The Tradition and the Individual Talent. And only recently, in an interview, maybe a couple of months ago, Dylan was paying his respect to the notion of a tradition. And he saw his role as a writer, as a songwriter, to recycle and reframe that tradition. So when we have the notion of the Renaissance, he uses the themes, those universal themes of the Renaissance. So in Romance for the Soul, Shakespeare draws so much on Dylan draws so much on Shakespeare. In Desolation Row, there are at least 7 references to Shakespeare in that one song, you know, like Ophelia, she's neath the window, all that sort of thing. So it's rooted in references, but quite mostly Dylan uses the classical tragedies and all the themes that are explored in those, like King Lear, Othello, Macbeth, and Hamlet, and also the history plays as well. So so the study is looking at the parallel lives of Dylan, Shakespeare. I bring in Edgar Allan Poe, D.H. Lawrence. So Dylan himself is a great cultural historian. So, hello, hi. What's your name? Val. Hello, pleased to meet you, and I'm glad to have the audience has suddenly doubled. So that's good. Yeah, okay. Should I just continue? Yeah, I'll just roll on with it. So I was explaining the main themes of my book, Roadmaps for the Soul. There's flyers, there's a handout there which you can take if you wish. And I'm in the process of promoting the book now. So as I said, Bob Dylan talks about his rough and rowdy ways, his never-ending tour. Last year, at the age of 83, he did 135 concerts worldwide. So the guy's got amazing stamina, if nothing else, you know. And so, as well as there are three journeys going on. There's Bob Dylan's journey from Hibbing to Tulsa to Nashville to New Orleans to Europe and to Florida. There's Shakespeare's journey from Stratford to London, both from places in the middle of nowhere. You know, Stratford was a market town in the Renaissance. Hibbing, small town in the middle of nowhere. Like, as I said earlier, a town that when I visited it was like it was still in the 1950s in some ways, like reassuringly numb is how I call it in a certain way. Very comfortable. And the fascinating thing is that Dylan's early life was nothing like the content of those early songs, which are so radical, so wonderful. Best songs ever written, in my opinion, you know. And his life, even though he lied about his background when he first arrived in New York, okay, he was teased when he first performed for $1 a day playing harmonica. They said to him, we want folk singers, you sound like a hillbilly, you know. And so he made loads of lies that he'd left home when he was 13, that he'd worked in a circus in New Mexico, that then he went to Colorado. But all the time, he grew up in a very comfortable middle-class home. If you go to Hibbing, his brother still lives in the area, David, and his father ran an electrical store, you know. Not wealthy, but certainly not poor. So one of the questions is where all these ideas came from for all these wonderful songs from the early period, those songs of injustice. And he always said, I'm just a conduit. I don't know where they come from. And he was asked by Scorsese, could you write those songs like A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall? To me, the best protest song that's ever been written. And he said that every line in it was the first line of a song. And he said, well, I don't think I'll have enough time alive to write all those songs, so I put as many as I can into one song. It's an amazing thing. And they asked him, Scorsese asked him, can you write songs like that now? And he said, no, I don't know where they came from. I really don't. But I can do other things. So his later career work will never be as good as those early songs, but he's developed his skills as a painter, had exhibitions in Shanghai recently, as a sculptor, working in iron and steel, gates and so on. He does things like that. And he said in one of his songs, my dreams are made of iron and steel, you know, with a big bouquet of roses hanging around, you know. And so that's the romantic side, I suppose, coming out. But yeah, so he does other things. And I guess, so it's a travelogue. So what I was doing was trying to link across the centuries those worlds of Shakespeare and other writers with the contemporary world of Bob Dylan. And so you've got this contradiction. So Dylan's work is deeply rooted in that Renaissance tradition, recycling it. But rather like Eliot says in Tradition in Individual Talent, the writer's job is to recycle forensically the tradition and then form something original out of that recycling. And of course, Eliot did it himself with The Wasteland. You know, I mean, it's rooted in so many references, but it produces a magnificently original piece of work. So this is the third journey. One journey is the journey of Bob Dylan from nowhere, from Hibbing in the middle of nowhere. And have you seen the film Complete Unknown?
I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen it, Eric?
No, I'm afraid
Yeah,
not.
yeah. It's well worth a watch, and you have to keep saying, or at least I need to keep saying when I was watching it, it's a documentary. You know, sorry, it's not a documentary. It's a drama. It's not a documentary. So James Mangold, the director, what's really amazing with it is it plays with dramatic license. I mean, to the point of the absurd. There is a very famous concert in 1966 at the Royal Albert Hall, and the original, that was part of Dylan's tour when he went electric for the first time, and he performed like a Rolling Stone for the first time, really. Apart from the album version, his version at the Free Trade Hall has never been bettered in live performance. Now, the first half of the concert was acoustic, and Dylan had the audience eating out of his hand. If he'd come back after the intermission and played another acoustic set, everybody would have gone home happy. He didn't. He came back with a full electric band, you know, and they got booed, catcalled, and somebody shouted in Manchester, "Judas." And Dylan snarled back. This was a time when people didn't answer back, really. He sneered at them, "I don't believe you, you're a liar," and said to the band, "Play fucking loud." You know? They blasted the place apart, you know? It was a great concert, and he got booed. And so, but in the film, Complete Unknown, this is suddenly changed. And the actual reality was in Manchester in May 1966. With a guy, about 4 different people had said, "I was the guy who said Judas," you know? So they're all claiming to be Judas, you know? But how they do it in the film, which is an entirely watchable film with Chalamet, is very good, with his mannerisms of Bob Dylan, it becomes a woman shouting out Judas in Newport in the middle of the afternoon in 1965. It's just plain wrong. So why did he do it? Why did James Mangold do that? I think he was caught between the rock and the hard place. He should have either done 15 minutes more of the film so it could finish in 1966 with what actually happened, but he felt that it was so important for the piece, for the movie itself, that he had to fit it in somehow, you know? So he just kind of found a way to fit it in, but it has no relation to what actually happened. And so with my book, I kind of explore all those inconsistencies, and it also involves it's Dylan's journey from Hibbing, it's Shakespeare and contemporaries, their journey, and it's my own physical, emotional, and spiritual journey in the early summer of 2023 and the spring of 24 to each of those pivotal locations in Dylan's long career. Okay, so it's based on fieldwork, archive, primary and secondary research into Dylan's work. So I think it's an original study. And so at the moment it's with the publishers. I have the official launch in London on October the 13th. So this is the second talk I've done about it, you know. So it's still quite fresh. And of course, there are 2 other, I'll just put that down now, whoops, don't need it. There are 2 other works in the pipeline. There's a sequel which I've already got in my head a little bit, called Romance for the Soul, More Romance for the Soul, a European journey with Bob Dylan. And the thing is, with Dylan's background, he has so many sources. The guy's an encyclopedia of absorbing material from the blues, from jazz, from country. Seems to absorb all of those. And one of his links is very much with Scotland, Ireland, and English folk music. In fact, have you know Martin Carthy? By any chance, he's still alive. Martin Carthy was a folk singer in the early 1960s, and he introduced a very young Bob Dylan to an English audience, when he was a folk singer. And when you watch, I'd recommend the film, even though it distorts historical accuracy, Complete Unknown. I recommend it for two or three reasons. Three reasons. Firstly, it brings you back to the songs. And Chalamet, the actor, it took him 5 years to learn the role, to be able to mimic Bob Dylan, to be able to learn the songs and do a passable version of actually singing them. Secondly, it introduces a new audience, to Bob Dylan's wonderful songs. And thirdly, there's a real contrast in the film, how it develops as a drama. It starts in 1961, just before the freewheeling Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan arrives in New York. There's a story which isn't in the film that he decided to leave Hibbing with a friend of his to hitchhike to New York. They got halfway there, and his friend got homesick and was cold and turned back and became a disc jockey. Fine, in Minnesota. Bob continued, and in one of his early songs, he said, talking New York blues, the New York Times said it was the coldest winter for 17 years. I didn't feel so cold then. And he made it to New York. He had $10. That's all he had. He gave it to the taxi driver. He had nothing. But this is the freewheeling Bob Dylan. Really, really happy, really content just with his songs, his amazing songs, wherever they came from. 4 years later, at the end of the film, Complete Unknown, he's the first rock star, Bob Dylan. He's the first rock star. I know you had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but they were a group of people. He was on his own. So he had all this fame and fortune. And there's a clip at the end of the film, and he's in a limousine, dark glasses on, everybody hammering on the window, And he's like this, and he's reading a bit from the English tabloid press about him, what they're saying about him. And he just says, thank God I'm not me, as he continues. But you see him imprisoned by his own success and fame. And the change in his capacity to reinvent himself in those 3 or 4 years, from 1961 to 1965, to abandon the folk music scene, to embrace rock music, to do all that when he's not even 25, 24. He released Like a Rolling Stone when he's, 20, just 24 years old, amazing. So the film is worth seeing for documenting the changes in him. And the actor, the Chalamet, does that change quite well. You see the change from the optimistic, boyish. I mean, he was 20, but he looked about 15. He was so skinny, so emaciated almost. But then by the time he's in his early 20s, he's like surrounded by people, and he he had a motorbike crash in 1966, and recently he said to Scorsese, something had to give, it couldn't go on the way it was going on. I just couldn't take any more. it was about to make me sick, the attention. So it allowed him, by providence, to get away from it all for 4 or 5 years, and come back doing the respectable crooning of Nashville Skyline. So I hope my book will take people into that world of the world of Dylan himself and his journey, the parallels with Shakespeare. As I say, I have 2 other books in the pipeline. There's a European Road, more roadmaps for a soul, and there's this piece that I have in my head called The Foggy Ruins of Time, which is a line from Mr. Tambourine Man. And I'm still formulating that concept, and in it, Shakespeare and Bob Dylan meet each other. Okay, so it's semi-fiction. So Bob Dylan turns up in London in 1606, just when Shakespeare's written Hamlet and is working on Antony and Cleopatra and so on, and they meet in London. And then on the other side of it, Shakespeare goes to New York in 1965 and meets a young Bob Dylan. So I'm still working that through, but it's called The Foggy Ruins of Time. So it's semi-fictional creation, but I've got to do a bit more historical research because the history needs to be accurate on that. So those are my projects on Bob Dylan, and this one is really my own journey as well, because as I said when I was reading out the introduction, my first musical heroes, were not Bob Dylan. I said Dylan. I didn't know anything about him, but my mum always used to say when she heard his voice initially, she said, "Who on earth is that? It sounds like somebody like a cat out of a bag." Not the most kind of complimentary comment, but it stuck with me through all his. Most singers have one voice or 2 voices. Dylan's got 7 or 8 voices. There's folk Bob, protest Bob, gospel Bob, country Bob, confessional Bob. They're all different. They're all nuanced. I'll stop there because I think I've said enough. So if you want to comment, ask questions, yeah, Val.
But what's the rest of your thought? If you want to comment, ask questions, comment.
Throw tomatoes. Or this thing. What
Or
the heck is this
It's a
thing?
melon.
It's so heavy.
It's a melon. It's nice.
Yeah, so if you want to, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, he continually, confounds the audience all for decade after decade, right? Usually delightfully, right? The Rolling Thunder Review.
He's got a charm about him.
I'm sure that was well received. People got over being shocked that he was doing that. But I remember hearing at the Universal Amphitheater, and it's like, saying to my friend, I'm like, I know, but does he have to abandon the all pretense of melody here, but he wants to do that. He wants to force the audience through another phase.
He's always
How many times do you suppose he's done that?
well. You can see him as the artist constantly reinventing his work. Like Lay Lady Lay. There's a crooning version on Nashville Skyline, which is probably what people are most familiar with. There's a Hard Rain version, which is a completely different song in every way. Musically, lyrically, everything. He's reworked the song completely. So he rarely does the same song twice in the same way, reinventing himself. And I remember at that Hard Rain concert, it was really wet and miserable in Colorado, and this wouldn't happen now. He had the list of his songs that he was going to do written on his shirt sleeve, the running order. Of course, with the rain, it all got blurred, and he couldn't see any of it. And so, luckily, he had a wonderful band with him, with Scarlett Rivera and Mick Ronson and so on. And they basically improvised. They had to guess which song he was doing because he couldn't read what he'd written down anymore. Very amateurish in some ways, but I think it's like he's never been afraid to change direction in what he wants to do, I remember when he went to gospel music, you know, Slow Train Coming. There's a trilogy of albums he does: Slow Train Coming, Shot of Love, Saved, and I saw him at that period in England, in London, in 1979-80, and he came on the stage, and he didn't play a single song from his vast catalogue. Didn't do anything from it. There was a whole new different audience there, as well as his fans. There were the what you might call the gospel right, the religious right. He did 17 songs from religious songs, said to the audience, "I hope you've all been uplifted," and left. That was it. Like he'd not written any. He didn't sing a single song that people wanted to hear, you know. Now, why was that, you know? Is it somebody continually on the move, or, yeah. Or was he saying they're all old songs? Like he almost demolishing, you know? Like there was this thing in 1970 when he released Self Portrait. Again, the gospel songs have actually, with Mark Knopfler and so on, have stood the test of time pretty well. They were really well produced and they sound good, you know? Self Portrait, like Grail Marcus, who I met in Tulsa at the Bob Dylan conference, when he heard Self Portrait for the first time, his first comment was, "What is this shit?" You know? And Dylan has spoken about it. He writes about it in Chronicles, Volume 1. He just couldn't take any more. I thought, I'm going to put together a terrible album just to get people off my back, you know? So he'd done all these wonderful albums up to National Skyline and then said, I'm going to deconstruct all this, because it had on Figaro, Dylan, Le Nouveau Dieu, the new God. He was 21 years old, you know? And so haunted by the fame of it. So he thought, I'm going to do cover versions. I'm going to put out rubbish, you know? But actually, when you hear it now, it doesn't sound all that bad, you know?
Did Grail Marcus talk about how he's reassessed that album?
Yes, he did, yeah, because he said at the time he meant it, but because he'd been used to me, Highway 61, Revisited is his best album, in my opinion. But and then John Wesley Harding, very good. The Calvinist Roots of America, exploring American identity, the cultural historian, and even Nashville Skyline was. He sounded like he'd been singing country all his life suddenly, you know, not like it was just the first time he'd ever done it. That album was cut in one evening, you know. He'd never done country music before, but he sounded like a natural to it. And I think that was his first attempt to deconstruct things, but it was his number one album in the States and the UK. So he thought, I've got to do something really bad. So he did Self Portrait, you know, and Grail Marcus saying, what is this shit? And when he spoke in Tulsa, he said, actually, especially as a version of the complete take called Another Self Portrait, which is remastered, has some more complete songs, because Dylan's never been the most brilliant at assessing his own material. You know, he'd leave songs off albums, which, like Blind Willie McTell, which is a masterpiece, never got any on any official album, you know. Red River Shore, bootleg, wonderful song, never got on an official album. So I don't know what that is in his processing, or whether he's feeding the bootleg industry. So Grail Marcus said about, actually, Another Self Portrait, actually, it's not that bad, you know. It stands a re-listen to. So he's reassessed it a little bit, yeah.
Where was his head at when was that, before the flood? When was that?
Before,
Tour with the band?
yeah, that was 1974.
74. So what had he done just before that? It had been a while.
Well, what you'd had was after self-portrait. You had New Morning. Then he got working. He left Columbia for the first time. Had a disagreement, and signed with Island Records and did Planet Waves. But the main thing about Planet Waves, he does things in trilogies. So in the 60s, there's a great trilogy with Bring It All Back Home, Highway 61, Blonde on Blonde. The first double album. I was reading, there was a piece, a presentation in Tulsa, suggesting that Subterranean Homesick Blues was the first rap song, Influenced a lot by Chuck Berry, that's for sure. But so you have that trilogy in the 60s, but you have another trilogy in the 70s, Planet Waves, Blood on the Tracks, and Desire. And the thing is about Planet Waves, it got him working with the band again, and that tour, 1974 tour, was with Bob Dylan and the band. And of course, there was that chemistry with him and Robbie Robertson, a phenomenal chemistry. We were on the same wavelength with things, and that was a wonderful tour. Not his best live album, bit shouty, and sometimes you can't tell one song from the other, but it's just the experience of the occasion, yeah. So you have that trilogy, yeah.
Speaking of trilogies, I have a trilogy of questions.
Go on then, fire away, please.
In no particular order, you can answer them however you'd like, in sequence or out of sequence. First, what has you so intensely invested? Why are you so invested in this figure? That's the first question.
Uh-huh.
The second is knowing that the facts have been massaged, even within a film that you recommend, how can you trust any of the sources that you've sought or that you cite to be gospel, as it were, if things are so prone to being distorted, shifted, changed, nuanced? Not to say that anything is necessarily false, even though I heard you use, well, that's just inaccurate or that's just wrong. But barring direct access to the man himself, which you may have, how can you trust anything that you've found to be the truth? Third, this foggy ruins of time, you said, was the
Yes, yeah.
You said you wanted to press for historical accuracy, and yet the premise itself is completely anachronistic. So why does it matter that all of the nuts and bolts be any more true than anything else, like this film, or like any of the other things that could or could not be true, if it's about the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law?
Okay, I think if I start with the first one, why have I invested so much time and energy in it? Is when I first heard it, I'd never heard anything like it, Bruce Springsteen famously said, it's a bit of a cliche, Elvis liberated the body, Bob Dylan liberated the mind, something like that. And I'd never heard anything like it. And I had the greatest hits thing, I played it endlessly, and I just thought the strength, to me, has always been in the songs themselves and the music, Those have never disappeared. And have you seen Girl from the North Country, the musical? It's on in London at the moment. And again, there's a tension there because the actual drama is set in the 1930s in the Depression. The writer, Colin McPherson, Irish writer, wrote to Bob and said, can I use some of your songs? And he sent him the script, and Bob kind of made one or two comments, observations, sent it back, said you can use whatever you want, So he uses 22 songs there in the musical, and what comes alive is even with the passage of time, and Colin McPherson said, actually, those songs are like tanks. You can do anything with them. the way they're structured. They're like bulletproof almost. They're so wonderfully written, actually, in terms of melody and construction, that you can do anything with them. So that's why it has many different uses. And it just appealed to me. George Harrison said it, like he always sounded. He said two things about Bob Dylan. You know, they collaborated together. He was George was Dylan's favourite Beatle. It was too competitive between him and John Lennon. Certain amount of jealousy on John Lennon's part, you know. Paul McCartney, he didn't really know, but George, he collaborated with, who was his favourite Beatle. And George Harrison said, "Can you imagine a world without Bob Dylan?" You know? And they're the most wonderful songs ever written. And the fact that they're so flexible, and to me, all great music, you know, is a lot of Dylan's songs are of his own time, but they're timeless as well. Like The Times Are Changing, it could have been written last week, to me, not 60 years ago. Do you know what I mean? It still has that lyrical power. So that voice has kind of stayed with me, all those voices. And what was your second question? Tell me.
The second was, given all of the license creatively and poetically that people have taken, and just, you know, stories and games of telephone, and whether this is fact or fiction, how can you trust anything that you actually researched or sought without having access to the man himself, unless you do have that?
Well, not yet. I'm going to send you a copy of the book, though.
But until then,
You have to. Well, he once said, quite famously, the purpose in life is not to find yourself. The purpose is to create yourself. You know, and the whole thing is a mask. You know, and he likes masks. There was one time in concert when he. You know, he's called Robert Allen Zimmerman. He's not called Bob Dylan, so it's a fictional creation. And he appeared in England, a Halloween concert, and he said to the audience, "I'm wearing my Bob Dylan mask tonight. I'm masquerading." You know.
so someone who's embracing so much mystique, what's fact and what's fiction? How do you trust it?
You trust the songs. You trust the music, and the authenticity.
But how can you actually verify anything that you're claiming is the case or isn't?
To an extent, you believe what you want to believe. That's true, you know. But I guess you look at, for example, he used to get quite a lot of his early songs from newspaper articles, you know, and newspaper reports. And
How do you know that?
it's well, you check the original, you check the newspaper account, the journalists and so on. For example, he sung in 1963 with Martin Luther King at the Civil Rights March on Washington. And yeah, when he was 21 years old, you know, 200,000 people there. He wasn't fazed by it at all. And he sung a song called "Only a Pawn in Their Game." And on the way back, he got the train back from Washington, New York to New York. And the front pages were all about Martin Luther King, you know, "I Have a Dream," all wonderful stuff. Tucked away on page 5, there were 2 columns, no pictures, of a black maid that had been murdered by a guy called William Zanzinger for being lazy and not bringing his drink on time, you know, in the restaurant in Maryland. Those 2 paragraphs became the genesis of one of his, I think, his greatest protest song, called "The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll." You know, from that newspaper story. That became the main story, not Martin Luther King. And he wasn't that famous then, but he names names. And the key word to me in that song is the word lonesome. Not the death of Hattie Carroll, the lonesome death. And I thought about this in my writing. Why lonesome? Because there were so many people around at that time that could have stopped it, but nobody did anything to help her. You know? So her death.
Doesn't answer my question.
No?
No.
Well, what? Come
Well,
Ask me more.
just ultimately, I haven't seen Complete Unknown, so I have to take your word for it. But I'm saying, however many people are going to be influenced by that, the same way you were influenced, however you were exposed
Yes.
in the moment, right?
Yes.
As you said, the part of why it's worth seeing is because it is bringing in a whole new audience to this particular time that maybe they wouldn't have had access to otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So as you said, your prime example, and this is minutia, and I'm also someone who's a fan of minutia, so this is why I'm zooming in here.
Yeah, I like it. I don't like it. Okay.
If you can say, oh well, this Judas incident actually happened in '66 when they smushed it into 55, or sorry, 65,
Yeah.
because they didn't have enough time in the film, or they wanted this particular spirit of the law.
Yeah.
To be
The
present.
film would have been more complete if it had been included.
Right.
For
But
sure.
but it's not accurate.
No.
It's not.
No.
According to you, I'm just
It's not
I'm
accurate.
just reflecting what you've given.
Yeah.
So how do you know that anything is just using that example? And as you then said, someone who's embracing mystique in the nature of this beast, someone who literally is, oh, I'm so glad I'm not me, or
Yeah.
I'm not even using my real name, or isn't it so great that I have a mask under which all of this exists? How can you verify any of this minutia? So between the headlines, I mean, of course, there's historical record and things that are actually in print and things that are actually on film, but between that, when you're stringing all of these pearls together, when you're following all of these breadcrumbs out of the dark briar in the forest, how do you know what's fact and what's fiction? If you weren't there, if he wasn't there to tell you, how do you know?
But how do you know that anything's not
That's
fact or fiction?
precisely what I'm asking. And again, because the nature of your interest is so intense,
Yeah.
for whatever reason it is that he appealed to you, I have a similar fixation on Cleopatra, for example.
Okay.
I'm a thespian, so I'm less familiar with Bob than I am with old Billy Boy.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot more time, cutting my teeth and, in the deep cuts of Shakespeare.
Well, what do we have to authentic? Sorry.
So all that to say,
Yes.
when you know that all of it is so elastic and all of it is so nuanced and so prone to interpretation and license that's been taken over and over and over and over from generation to generation, from medium to medium, how can you say, oh, this happened this way and this did not, so that someone can then trust your source where they can't trust the film because that's inaccurate, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's
So
like.
how do we trust, or how do you even trust the sources that you sought in your research?
Okay, it's complex. It's like an Orwellian dystopian world in some ways. There's two things there, really, is that how do we know that anything happened? There's human memory and recall. I saw it as eyewitness. I saw people going through the death camps at Belsen. I mean, it's a grim example, but I witnessed it. And that lasts as long as a person's life, yeah? And how well it's recorded. The other is through recorded memory, isn't it? Of people who write about it, keep the story alive. For example, Shakespeare, I mean, he played with stories, like, for example, in Henry V, the Battle of Bosworth is a relatively small event. He turns it into a huge event. It's inconsequential in the war of the time. It doesn't matter that much, but he turns it into this great revelation of Falstaff and everything. Yeah, so artists do that, and time is
Precisely.
elastic. Yeah,
Precisely.
so what do you trust? I suppose. I mean, even with the Williams and Zinger one, the Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, that was the first time in Maryland that a white guy had been tried for it was manslaughter. Bob Dylan says first-degree murder. He wasn't charged with first-degree murder. Not factually accurate. He was charged with manslaughter because he went in the kitchen. He was drunk, Williams and singer, complained and hit her with a belt or something on her back and buttocks. And then she had a heart attack later, and it couldn't be established whether he actually killed her or whatever happened, yeah? And he got a 6-month sentence, That was it, And that was the first time a white guy had ever got any custodial sentence in Maryland for being responsible for the death of a black citizen, So this is why it was an extraordinary song, but he does play with it. It wasn't first-degree murder, He made that whatever, but the main point of the song is not just a personal tale, but to shed light on the institutional hierarchy. That's why I think it's one of his best songs, because he not only tells a story, but he also relates it to the wider picture,
But that's why I'm bringing into this discourse
Yes.
the entire realm and dichotomy betwixt, to
Yeah.
use this language, what we call the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law.
Yes.
Is it about the point that we're conveying, which is, this is an episode that's important and significant because X, Y, and Z, or is the minutia what matters? And so that's why my third question was, in the foggy ruins of time, it's a completely anachronistic premise. Why does it matter to be factually accurate down to?
Well, I don't know. I think depends how far you push out the boat, I suppose. I mean, it's a meeting that cannot ever take place, so it's bound to be entirely fictional. However, were a bit of fact, say I'm going to locate Bob Dylan coming to London to meet Shakespeare in 1606, it might be useful to know what was happening in England in 1606.
Of course, it would be useful, but
Not essential,
right.
but
Right.
it would be useful to know, kind of it's a time of, it's a year after the Gunpowder Plot, when, political times are uncertain.
As a
It
framework.
had a long reign of Elizabeth I. England's now a Protestant country. Catholics are regarded as heretics, all of that kind of thing.
Have the framework.
Yeah.
But how essential is the minutia? So same with, folks who will see this film. I'm sure lots of folks will think that that's accurate. If you yourself, knowing all that you know, have to keep saying it's not a documentary, it's not a documentary, it's not a documentary, if that's a constant reminder for you,
Yes.
then you already know that so many folks who see this film, as with so many others, will take that as the sequence of events. And is that a crime?
No. I mean, and as I say, when I watched the film, I thought I'm going to disentangle myself from it a little bit. Otherwise, I'm going to be picking holes in everything. And I actually did really enjoy it, And the actor, he does a fine job. It's a fine creation, and it works really well.
And his name is Chalamet
Yes,
versus Chalamet.
Chalamet, yeah,
Chalamet.
Chalamet. Sorry, Chalamet.
It's not my name. I'm just saying these are things that, some folks notice, some folks don't care.
Yeah, I know it's
sometimes
Chalamet.
it matters, sometimes it doesn't. It's a great performance.
When I write about it, it'll be accurate.
Well, I'm just saying whether someone pronounces a name correctly is not necessarily as important as how they're affected by the thing, right?
He did miss the statement that he thought Dylan's name was Dylan.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I grew. That's what I heard in my
We
head.
have to wrap it because,
do we?
with a few
Oh, okay.
minutes, but yes,
Okay.
because we have another show at 7:30.
Oh, okay.
My God.
You're good people.
My God.
Yeah.
There's a bass.
Yeah. But
There's
just,
an amplifier.
No,
So
absolutely.
anyway, so now
I'll do that.
Should we continue while you're setting up, Eric? Yeah.
Because it's just two people talking. So Dylan, again, that's a pronunciation. That's an emphasis on the wrong.
Because I
syllable
never heard it because
versus
yeah.
putting two letters in different places where they aren't.
when I listened to the radio, I never heard him on the radio. And you made when I
But seeing a word printed versus hearing someone say it,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we do that constantly.
Yes.
I'm just saying that the L and the M in the name are in one place versus the opposite places. So again, it's not to pick nits. It's to
No, no.
say, again, how can you trust any authority?
Yes.
Much less anyone trusting yours and trusting and so on and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so if you're
We're actually
doing
pretty
something
good
that's
time-wise. It's only 6:25.
okay,
So slow down. And
Slow down.
Enjoy yourself.
Yeah, all
well,
right.
that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just to say, again, I have a very similar kind of dilemma, conundrum, crux of interest with Cleopatra, because so much was destroyed in the fire at Alexandria, right? So
Yeah.
much was destroyed by all of those who succeeded her, who did not want her story to succeed her. And so, again, whether it's malice, whether it's happenstance, those honorifics are gone. They've been destroyed.
And then you can say with Shakespeare, how
complete
trustworthy
license, exactly.
were his sources.
Most of it isn't necessarily meant to be entirely historically accurate.
No.
It's not meant to be a documentary. It's meant to be an artist's license and creative take on whatever it is that they're conveying. So many other people could have a similar story and a different take, but the facts, right? Whether it's fiction that's more effective in this lane.
I think with Bob Dylan, I've seen him many times in concert, and he's always managed to be. He's still a charismatic figure. Even now at 84, he's still quite charismatic for his age.
Cleopatra is still
Yeah,
fascinating, and
yeah.
she was gone before Christ.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I
you know,
mean?
so-
So it's not to criticize it or to condemn it in any way. It's just to say, well, who are we? And when you can sit in the theater and say, oh, that didn't happen then, that happened at this time. Sure, there are certain things that you can
Yes.
look to that are time stamped and dated, and then certain things that aren't. Other things that are completely
And like
anecdotal.
his mystique is like on the
On
road
purpose.
65 years and
And it's
a
intentional.
global icon, but still a very private person.
And it's intentionally
Yeah.
blurry. It's
Absolutely.
intentionally blurry. So how can you discern? How can you really extricate what's what? And trust but verify, and then past a point, you really can't verify. You can only trust. You can only have the faith.
Yes.
Because you're not going to be able to actually fact check it all.
No.
Without access to the man, and his memory may also be fuzzy.
Because sometimes
His
with
own
Dylan,
voice.
if he's taken a melody from somebody, sometimes he credits it, says, I took the tune from. Other times he doesn't,
And even ourselves, even our own lives, our
Yeah.
own memories are still prone to the foggy ruins of time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and so,
yeah.
And so in that access, even if you could make it as direct as possible, it still wouldn't be as historically accurate.
If I do get round to writing it, there'll be a kind of minimalist background about what was going on in London in 1606, what's going on in New York 1965. The rest is a fictional creation of.
But that's not how you presented it. How you presented it was not a minimalist kind of framework. You said, I'm really pushing, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said, I'm really pushing for historical accuracy.
It does. I mean, you can't.
You can't.
Yeah, it has to be accurate. Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? And so
Yes.
I'm just wondering, when you're having whatever profound experience you're having in this theater, having so much material under your belt, and someone who's never maybe heard a
No.
note of Dylan in their lives
But
comes to that film and is completely overcome and maybe becomes as intensely interested as you have been.
Yes. Yeah.
The same way that I'm so intensely interested in Cleopatra millennia after the fact.
But in terms of theatre, like when you go to the theatre, we all suspend belief, don't we? I mean,
We must.
you have to, because I remember
We must.
seeing Jonathan Pryce play Hamlet, and I was in London, and I was spellbound by it.
But that's precisely my
A
point.
brilliant actor.
But that's precisely my point.
Yeah, I mean, and I thought there was a ghost.
So where do we draw the lines?
Yeah.
Is really the question. It's not meant to, put you under any undue scrutiny as much as it's to say, oh, this is an ongoing query. This is something that you have to keep contending with, even as a so-called authority on the subject. And I have to continuously ask myself the same questions as I piece together my research when I know how much is missing from the time
Yeah.
and how much is skewed in the sources that I'm citing.
Yeah, because you're actually looking at what the artist says about him or herself. You're looking at what others have said about him or herself. You're looking at the body of critical work.
But he's also embracing mystique to
Yeah.
begin with.
Yeah,
That's the nature of
Yeah.
that beast.
Yeah.
To begin with, you know,
Yeah.
I'm someone that's more of a, I guess we'll call it literal, you know, kind of shortest distance between points is a straight line, closest as I can make it to a 1-to-1 ratio between what I say, what I think, and what I intend. Most people are not this way.
Yes.
He's the complete opposite of
Yeah.
that. And so if then everyone else is running the gamut between those two poles.
And he's also very good at that.
Well, he's got a lot of practice.
Yeah.
You know, but that's the thing, and similar to Cleopatra, I'm not saying she was one way or the other, but so much of her narrative has been shrouded in just as much mystery, and a lot of what people think about.
It's that
her.
charismatic quality. I mean, I remember seeing Eric Clapton in concert one time, and musically, a wonderful guitarist, you have to say, but a charisma-free zone. You know, I didn't have any charisma about him to me. I mean, wonderful musician, and I liked it, enjoyed it. But Bob has, maybe you believe what you want to believe, but he has that aura even now when he comes on the stage, mainly because of all the songs he's written, I suppose.
Well, so many people, you know, just to finish the thought that I began, so many people have a skewed and relatively unfortunate perspective on Cleopatra because
Yes.
of works like Antony and Cleopatra. She's only seen through the lens of the men.
Yes,
Right? Versus actually being quite profoundly. Are you okay? Sip it, you know. So
okay.
quite profoundly her own.
Air conditioning, I hate it. I've got,
Fine.
you know,
But quite profoundly her own thing.
yes.
And part of what I would love to illuminate and why I feel like I'm just a vessel, I can't tell you why this interest. I can tell you that I feel a parallel with her life, but I can't tell you why it's got me in its clutches. I can't tell you where that started. You know, I'm assuming it's a similar grip that Dylan has on you. You know, I was exposed to her through other means, but so many people literally this over still
Yes. Yes.
will find some cheapy 2-bit piece of shit plastic blunt bob cut costume in a drugstore
Yes.
and a headpiece and it's Cleopatra and they don't know dick about her.
Yeah, they used to have Bob Dylan impersonation competitions, all that.
But they still have to know more about Bob than anyone has to know about Cleopatra to be here for Halloween. You know?
Yes.
And so what I'm saying is the name recognition has lasted through the ages.
Yeah, yeah.
And nothing about the narrative has survived nearly as long. And so this piece that I'm writing, speaking of Shakespeare, speaking of New York, which is my hometown, that's where I was born and raised, you know, so that's another realm that we can, you know, go into the deep cuts of if you'd like. I've already pitched this to Oscar Eustace, who's the AD over at the pub, or the, over at the Public, where the pub is also housed. The Joseph H. Papp Public Theater of New York is the extensive name, but the Public. Oscar Eustace has produced Hamilton. Oscar Eustace and I shared the same mentor here at Stanford University, where I went undergrad and grad. But I know Oscar through the theater world. I know Oscar through the mentor that we shared. So I've already pitched this show. That man has already produced a juggernaut. He was the one that commissioned Angels in America from Tony Kushner. And the two of them and I shared this same mentor. So I've already had this pitch meeting back in October of 2016. He's already interested in this work, which I think, not to sound like an asshole, has even more global scale potential to have a seismic impact than Hamilton, simply because most people didn't even know he was on a $10 bill before that show.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Cleopatra's got more name recognition still, and no one knows anything about her story. They just know her through the men. They
Yeah.
know her as some harlot. They know her as some Jezebel, which is ridiculous, because again, she was only with Caesar. Who was
Well, one
assassinated
thing
in the Senate.
in common with between.
But
Sorry,
just to
tell
wrap
me.
that up,
Yeah.
She was only with Caesar, who was assassinated in the Senate, and then with Antony. Boss, that's it. Where's this harlot Jezebel reputation coming from? You're with one guy who got murdered, and then with the next guy. Where's this rep coming from?
Yes, and
You know? And to think that she accomplished it all without even making it to 40. You know, to think that she was harnessing some of the greatest wealth on the planet bankrolling so much of the Roman conquests, providing military strategy, providing resources, a polyglot, not a looker. People conflate her with Helen of Troy. She was not a looker.
Well,
She was brilliant, but that was not the source of her appeal. Liz Taylor
was gorgeous.
But that's all
Now,
propaganda.
turn to the
Yeah.
camera.
It's not about
say
Liz.
goodnight to the audience, both of you.
Okay.
Good night to the audience.
Okay.
Fade out.
Thank you to anybody who's watching and listening to this wonderful conversation. And then, yeah,
But that's
good luck.
But that's precisely what I'm talking about. The power of the propaganda with Liz Taylor.
Yeah.